Discover the incredible secrets of the Roman Empire. 7 amazing transformations revealed. Jake slumped in his cramped office, a stack of worn books teetering on the edge of his desk like his fragile sense of purpose. The papers on ancient Rome, every word etched with a passion he couldn't seem to convey, felt like artifacts from a forgotten era. And yet, here he was, a 30-something adjunct history professor in a bustling New York community college, trying to spark interest in a room full of students scrolling through their phones. The urgency buzzed in his bones. His father's voice echoed in his head, urging him to achieve something worthwhile. Failure loomed like a shadow, reminding him of the family legacy, the pride of a firefighter, the embodiment of grit and resilience. What was the point of education if nobody was listening? Navigating the college campus felt like weeding through a chaotic marketplace, everyone rushing past, spirited conversations drowning out the centuries of history he longed to share. Each morning, he pondered the monumental transformations of the Roman Empire, the triumphs and defeats, the rise and fall that felt so distant, yet oddly connected to his own life. Here he was, trying to teach lessons that had the power to change lives, but what if his lessons held no weight? He felt the invisible barrier between aspiration and reality, the disheartening truth that, as an adjunct, his contributions would forever be overshadowed. It stung. Then, one evening, buried in the dusty tomes of antiquity, illuminating connections surged through him. The Romans echoed his struggles, ambition battling tradition, the incessant pressure to prove oneself significant. But with each realization came the frustration of feeling unheard. Another professor's dismissive glance made his insides knot tighter. The whispers about his research being sidelined for someone's benefit brewed disdain that mingled with desperation. He wrestled with loyalty to colleagues who knew his worth. Could he stand up against a sea of indifference? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now, let's continue. Jake knew he couldn't retreat into silence. The prospect of coiling into a corner felt suffocating. The simmering frustration urged him to confront the injustice. Sarah, a fellow professor with fiery determination, felt like an ally in this tempestuous sea. Together, they hatched a plan to expose the murky dynamics within the department. The tactical discussions ignited a fire in Jake, with hope and dread intertwined. Just when he thought he had found his footing, cracks of doubt obscured his ambition. The urgency to act clawed at him, but the fear of ruining collegial bonds stung like a fresh wound. That next faculty meeting, the pivotal moment, loomed over him. Tension laced the air, a chorus of voices swirling together as Jake battled his inward turmoil. He felt each heartbeat echo in his ears, a pounding reminder of his commitment to integrity versus the loyalty that had kept him tethered. As he clenched his fists, ready to speak out in defense of his work and ambitions, silence enveloped the room, thick with the weight of uncertainty. Would he find his voice amongst the powerful hands that could crush his resolve? The air crackled with foreboding as Jake stood on the precipice of transformation, poised to redefine everything he had known about loyalty, purpose, and his own identity. The flicker of defiance kindled in his chest, but the void of potential failure felt more potent than ever. Would he step into the light, or succumb to the shadows? Every inch of the faculty meeting room felt cloistered, as if the walls bore witness to the unspoken fears and ambitions of all present. Jake could sense the tension, each colleague's gaze ricocheting off him like arrows dipped in doubt. He could picture them, clad in their professional armor, ready to dissect his every word. The intensity of the moment both terrified and electrified him.
This was his culmination point, a fulcrum balancing integrity and ambition, a choice that would ripple through his life, potentially casting his future into an uncertain horizon. As the chairperson droned on about departmental logistics, Jake's mind raced, the clamoring thoughts cascading into a single beam of resolve. He had arrived at this moment not just as a professor, but as a man who refused to let his voice be muted. He took a breath, focusing on the stack of research he had validly contributed, a historical analysis of transformations that resonated with his personal odyssey. It was as if the essence of Roman ambition pulsed in his veins, reminding him that those who dared were often memorialized in history. Sarah's encouraging nod cut through his mental fog. Despite the potential consequences, she had become his anchor, solidifying strength where he felt vulnerable. But did he have enough grit to leverage this opportunity into something substantial? Suddenly, the realization struck him. He was more than an adjunct. He had become a vessel for those voices lost in the chaotic corridors of institutional indifference. As the conversation shifted to new policies and budget allocations, Jake's hand shot up instinctively. Eyes darted toward him, disbelief mingling with curiosity. The chairperson set down her reports with an air of skepticism. Jake swallowed hard, but propelled himself into the spotlight, driven by a quiet yet fierce conviction.
With each passing day, he felt the walls of that meeting room inexorably closing in, pressuring him to convert this internal shift into something tangible. He arrived at his office earlier than usual, the early morning light spilling through the window and casting a warm glow over the piles of books that sat waiting like sentinels. The silence provided a stark contrast to the internal clamor that had become a constant presence. Today, he vowed, he would channel the anxiety into action. Jake opened his laptop, staring at the blank screen that seemed to mock his hesitance. He needed a plan, not merely a continuation of his own research, but a strategy to engage his colleagues, a call to arms, urging them to consider the implications of their funding choices. Something shifted within him. This couldn't be just about the curriculum, it had to be about the ethos of the department itself. He began to type out a draft for an all-faculty email, choosing his words carefully, feeling their weight as he constructed sentences that linked history with present practice. He articulated a vision for a reform that drew from the lessons of the past, echoing the very philosophies he had studied so rigorously. With each word, his confidence surged, and by the time he pressed send, a sense of liberation coursed through him. This small act was a significant shift from passive observer to active participant, and its implications resonated deeply. But alongside this excitement brewed an uncomfortable thought. What if the response was negative? What if they dismissed him as an outlier, an antagonistic force in a system that thrived on conformity? The fear was like a ghost, hovering nearby and whispering doubts, but Jake chose to ignore it. He had come too far to retreat. The responses poured in almost immediately. Some were supportive, echoing his concerns and acknowledging the need for change. Others were cautionary, warning him about the entrenched interests that would surely resist reform. Their differing tones illuminated the divides within the department that he had previously overlooked. It was frustrating and invigorating all at once. In the ensuing days, as he prepared for a second faculty meeting, Jake found himself contemplating the deeper significance of this struggle. He became acutely aware that his personal evolution mirrored a broader historical narrative, the intricate dance of power, vulnerability, and resilience present in the rise and fall of empires. If he could navigate his own fears, maybe he could inspire others to confront theirs. Determined, he reached out to colleagues individually, sharing his vision and gathering insights, building a coalition of like-minded professors. It felt exhilarating to transform a solitary fight into a collective initiative. However, lurking in the back of his mind were the repercussions of his actions. What if he inadvertently forged new adversaries among skeptics who held sway in the department? As the day of the next faculty meeting approached, excitement mingled with fear. Jake realized that the lines were drawn, not only between those who supported him and those who opposed him, but also within himself.
Each conversation deepened his commitment, yet it made clear a new trajectory fraught with potential conflict. In the final moments before the meeting, a thought struck him. What if success only amplified his struggle against those formidable entities he aimed to influence? Would the once muted voices of his colleagues unite behind him, or would they position him as a scapegoat for their unexamined complacency? The time had come to face the collective institution, one that had been resistant to change for far too long. And Jake couldn't help but wonder, would he rise as a leader or crumble under the weight of expectation? Jake stood at the threshold of the meeting room, his heart racing and thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a gust of wind. The familiar surroundings felt charged as he took a deep breath, grounding himself in the moment. Today wasn't just about confronting a roomful of colleagues, it was a litmus test for his resolve, his emerging identity as a reformer. As the faculty members trickled in, Jake took a seat near the front, strategically positioning himself at the epicenter of possibilities. He glanced around, studying the faces that had once seemed so familiar. Now they appeared as poignant reflections of the myriad viewpoints that defined their academic realm. Each member embodied varying degrees of resistance or support for the challenges he sought to address. When the meeting officially commenced, Jake's palms were slick with perspiration. He listened intently to the opening remarks, but his mind was already formulating how he would interject, how he would draw the discussion back to the issues he had so passionately articulated in his email. The trepidation in him felt like a taut string stretched to its limit, ready to either snap or sing. As the agenda meandered, he seized his moment. "I believe we need to reconsider the implications of our funding choices," he stated, his voice steady but underlined by urgency. The room fell silent, a palpable tension hanging as he spoke. He outlined his vision, interrelating it with data, anecdotes, and the unshakable ethos that seemed to ignite a spark in his colleagues' eyes. After his presentation, he awaited the responses. They came, swift and varied. Some nodded in agreement, encouraging the push for revolutionary ideas. Others furrowed their brows, disbelief and skepticism pulsing in their expressions. One senior faculty member, known for his staunch conservatism, leaned back, arms crossed. "And what makes you think these changes will bear fruitful results, Jake?" His question didn't just seek an answer, it was infused with skepticism, a challenge that sent waves of doubt coursing through Jake. But Jake didn't flinch. What we have isn't working.
The world around us is evolving, and if we want to remain relevant, we must be willing to adapt. History teaches us that stagnation is a precursor to decline. The words slipped from his tongue like a charge, echoing with the fervor of conviction. As the debate grew heated, Jake noticed something transformative occurring within himself. He was no longer merely a participant. He had stitched his inner anxieties into a tapestry of courage and resolve, and he could feel it resonating throughout the room. But that realization was shadowed by a lingering fear. If he stood firm against established protocols, would he alienate those who couldn't or wouldn't see his vision? The conversation wove through layers of contention, but Jake pushed through, unearthing deeper issues tied to the foundational principles of their academic mission. He didn't shy away from confrontation, rather he welcomed it, finding empowerment in articulating the arduous path ahead. With each rebuttal, he sharpened his stance, feeling a burgeoning sense of authority. As the meeting drew to a close, it became evident that something had shifted. There were whispers of concern, but also a faint aura of possibility. Jake recognized that the chasm he had once dreaded was now an opportunity for collective awakening, an invitation to forge alliances in pursuit of reform. Stepping out of the meeting room, adrenaline coursing through him, Jake felt a burgeoning clarity settle over his thoughts. This was not simply about him combating skepticism. It was about invigorating an entire field with both courage and purpose. Yet the realization was tinged with a stark truth. With engagement came tension, and the stakes had never been higher. He now faced the inevitable question that echoed in his mind like a relentless drumbeat. How much was he willing to sacrifice in this pursuit of change?
And were there risks that could shatter the very foundation he sought to transform? The intensity of potential conflict loomed large, and he stood at a precipice, one that promised growth and peril in equal measure. Walking down the stark hallway, Jake felt the weight of his earlier confrontation simmering just beneath the surface. He had stepped into the fray, but the aftermath ignited a new uncertainty. Had he overstepped? The curious glances from colleagues robbed him of clarity. Doubt dripped from the edges of his resolve. In deep thought, he found himself at his office door, the familiar surroundings welcoming yet intimidating. Papers were scattered across his desk, notes from meetings past mingling with reminders of what lay ahead. Realigning his focus, he pushed aside the shadows of uncertainty that lingered from his earlier encounter. Each tick of the wall clock became an echo of his racing heartbeat as he tried to settle into a plan of action. Opening his laptop, Jake reminded himself of his mission: to bridge the fractures that stifled their academic institution's growth.
However, his anxiety was closely mirrored by the emails flooding his inbox, messages from supporters eager to echo his sentiments, and others from dissenters armed with counter-arguments. He felt an itch to respond, but hesitated, knowing that every word he typed could either solidify his base or alienate the very people he sought to engage. Confronting the questions swirling in his head, Jake pulled out a piece of paper. Listing the faculty members who had shown support that day, he noted who might be open to discussions on reform. As he scribbled down names, a determination began to crystallize within him. He recognized that he couldn't do this alone. The changes he envisioned needed champions in their ranks. With renewed purpose, Jake crafted an email to those who had shown flickers of agreement during the meeting, inviting them for a casual brainstorming session. He wanted to cultivate an environment that encouraged sharing ideas, forging connections, and ultimately generating momentum for reform. His hands trembled slightly as he clicked send. Could he leverage their influence to steer the discourse? His phone buzzed, jolting him from his reverie. The response from a junior professor was immediate. "I'm in. Let's talk about how we can implement new funding strategies." Her enthusiasm stoked Jake's flame of resolve. If they could align the voices of support, the potential to drive change could ripple through the department. Yet even as hope flickered, doubt loomed larger. What if those invited turned against him? What if the stronger resistance he faced wasn't just skepticism, but open hostility? Jake shivered slightly at the thought. This wasn't merely about presenting ideas, it had become a test of character, the embodiment of his values. As he leaned back in his chair, the tension in his body started to coalesce around one poignant question. What if the vision he fought for ultimately put him at odds with the core values held by some colleagues? The thought gnawed at him as he pondered the definition of integrity and whether change was a noble aim or a foolhardy pursuit. Jake recognized that his journey ahead was fraught with challenges, but he also understood the profound transformation that awaited if he navigated them successfully. And yet, each step forward felt precarious, like walking on a tightrope that could easily snap under the pressure of opposition. He took a deep breath, suddenly aware that he stood at a crossroads. The time had come not just to face the dissenters or engage supporters, but to confront the very essence of his own ambitions and values. What was he truly prepared to sacrifice? And, more pressing, was reform worth the potential fracturing of relationships that had once defined his satisfaction in academia? The answers remained elusive, echoing ominously in the quiet of his office. The next meeting with those faculty supporters loomed, carrying with it the potential for both constructive dialogue and deeper division. The question hanging in the air was not just about change, it was about who he would become in its wake. As the clock ticked closer to the scheduled meeting, Jake's pulse quickened, the weight of expectation heaped upon his shoulders. His mind raced through potential scenarios, each more daunting than the last. He envisioned his supporters, eager to rally behind him, their eyes bright with conviction. But contrastingly, he pictured the skeptics, arms crossed, unwilling to yield ground. Sitting at his desk, he focused on the flickering light of his laptop, the meetings they would hold, each a delicate dance between collaboration and tension. The needed conversation about reforms weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't help but consider how each response might resonate beyond the confines of the room. Could his words construct a bridge, or would they simply lay more bricks on an already formidable wall? Jake grappled with the notion of influence, the influence he craved to wield, and the influence that felt vulnerable under scrutiny. The support he had experienced was heartening, yet it was tempered by the radical divide he had witnessed amongst his colleagues. Perceptions of his motives varied widely. To some, he was a visionary. To others, he was an interloper sowing discord. As he prepared notes for the gathering, he felt an unsettling pull of self-doubt. Was he genuinely prepared to advocate for innovative funding practices that could alter the landscape? Could he withstand the backlash if his vision contradicted deeply rooted ideologies? Squaring his shoulders, he reminded himself that personal convictions often paved the road for professional evolution. The meeting was not merely a chance to reshape policies, but also a moment to define his stance in a profound way. Each heartbeat resonated with the realization that this was not just about institutional change, it was a pivotal moment of self-discovery. With deliberate movements, he arranged his notes, pulling together data, testimonials, and examples from other institutions that had successfully navigated similar reforms. As he sketched out talking points, layers of latent confidence began to unfold. Throughout his years in academia, he had amassed sharper reasoning and deeper understanding. They were tools he now felt compelled to share. Jake glanced at the clock again. The minutes dwindled, time a relentless tide waiting for no one. He pictured the meeting room, its atmosphere fraught with tension but rich with possibility. An opportunity for imagination to flourish amidst skepticism. Would he find allies, or would he stand alone against the tide? Breathing in deeply, he stood up and paced his office, the familiar mundane surroundings transforming into a battleground of ideas. His reflection in the window showed a man burdened with tasks, yet emboldened with purpose, muddled ambition coursing through his veins. In this moment of clarity, he realized that to lead was to take risks, not just for the institution, but for himself. As he took his seat at the table, anticipation gripped him. He reminded himself that pushing for change required not only courage, but authenticity. The room was a crucible, a place where he would test his limits and challenge others to consider broader horizons. Then, just before he entered the meeting, an unexpected thought crossed his mind. What if, in his eagerness to ignite change, he faced resistance not just from colleagues, but from within himself? A sudden chill swept over him at that notion, a whisper of trepidation that this could be a defining moment of either triumph or turmoil. With that, he opened the door to face what lay ahead, knowing that the true challenge would be more than persuasive arguments. It would be about confronting the latent fears that lay buried deep within him. What new truths would emerge, and at what cost? The stakes were higher than ever, the repercussions yet untold. The moment Jake stepped into the meeting room, he felt time compress around him, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken judgments. 12 pairs of eyes turned to scrutinize him, some filled with hope, others with skepticism. The room buzzed with restrained energy, a palpable mixture of support and dissent. He cleared his throat and surveyed the faces before him. Each one told a story of ambition, failure, and the weight of institutional history. Swallowing hard, he straightened his back and began to speak. His voice, although steady, carried an undercurrent of tension. He addressed the need for innovative funding practices, drawing from the data and testimonials he had meticulously prepared.
As he articulated his vision, he noticed the subtle shifts in expression among his colleagues. A furrowed brow from a veteran administrator suggested a brewing storm, while a nod from a young faculty member hinted at intrigue. Each reaction served as a mirror, reflecting his inner turmoil, heightening his awareness of the stakes involved. When challenged, Jake discovered a reservoir of resilience he didn't know he possessed. The seasoned skeptic raised a finger, questioning the feasibility of his proposals. Instead of faltering, he leaned into the challenge, reworking his initial arguments with newfound fervor. Suddenly, the meeting transformed from a presentation into a battle of wills, and with each retort, he felt himself stepping further out of his comfort zone. But external challenges mirrored internal ones. Deep down, Jake sensed the stirring of self-doubt trying to claw its way back. Was he truly ready to claim his place among the influential, or was he merely playing a part?
The burden of expectation threatened to engulf him, and in the quiet corners of his mind, doubts whispered that he wasn't equipped to lead change. You can't just want change, you must embody it. His own voice echoed in his thoughts, a reminder he had embraced, yet one that felt increasingly fragile. Sprinkled among the back-and-forth discussions, Jake found moments of lucidity. It wasn't just about the reforms, it was about who he was becoming. Each argument sharpened his resolve, just as every dismissive remark urged him to dig deeper within himself. As the conversation surged forward, he began making connections between his proposals and his own experiences, the struggles in his career and his relentless path toward understanding. Realizing that his past failures had crafted the fortitude he now wielded, a sense of urgency fueled his determination. He wasn't only advocating for institutional change, he was carving out his identity. However, as the meeting dragged on, Jake noticed troubling signs. The tension in the room was thickening. One of his biggest opponents stood, arms crossed, looking as if he might declare a counter-offensive. The others seemed to sense it too, their focus narrowing toward this crucial moment. Jake knew this could either be the pivotal point for his aspirations or a sinking ship into chaos. Just when he was prepared to clarify his stance, Jake's heart raced anew. What if this was the moment where all the fears he had buried would rise up to confront him? The thought chilled him, but also ignited a spark of bravery. Was it possible that within the crucible of confrontation lay the very essence of transformation? The room fell silent, an invitation for Jake to fight against the tide of dissent or retreat into complacency. Facing the enemy of his own mind, he steadied himself and prepared to speak, not just about policies, but about conviction, belief, and what it truly meant to lead. This was no longer simply about institutional reform. This was about redefining who he was in the landscape of academia. In that moment of silence, the stakes crystallized around him. Would he falter under the weight of expectation, or would he stand firm and reveal a side of himself he had yet to fully embrace? Feeling the urgency of the moment closing in, he began to speak, a quiet but fierce determination igniting within him. As the words left his lips, the room held its breath, waiting for the revelation that could reshape everything. What awaited him on the other side of this pivotal moment? The tension hung palpably in the air as Jake gathered his thoughts, the scrutiny of his colleagues sharpening every word he dared to utter. "We can't afford to stay stagnant," he began, conviction coursing through him. The skeptical gaze of the veteran administrator was like an anchor, weighing him down, yet simultaneously propelling him to rise. He felt the fight surging within, pushing him toward a deeper engagement with the truths he was fighting to unveil. As he spoke, Jake noticed the cadence of his words transforming. They became more than a rehearsed pitch. They manifested as a confessional, a declaration of intent. Innovation shouldn't just be a buzzword, it should be our mantra. We owe it to our students and our future. With a bold approach to funding, we can dismantle the barriers that have held us back for too long. He could see the flicker of resistance in the old guard, still holding tightly to the belief that tradition was their strongest ally. The veteran's lips pursed tightly, a silent challenge hanging in the air. But instead of retreating into his own insecurities, Jake saw the opponent not as a foe, but as a catalyst. The very defiance he faced ignited something primal inside him, a desire to prove, not just to the room, but to himself, that he was worthy of this role. With each counterargument thrown his way, he felt an alchemy unfolding, his anxiety transformed into a clarion call for authenticity. What we need is audacity, combined with responsibility. Let's ask ourselves what lines we're willing to cross to transform this institution. History has shown us that the status quo can deceive. It can make us comfortable while steadily pushing us towards obsolescence. Jake's confidence grew as he delved deeper into the fabric of his message, layering it with personal anecdotes from his journey. He shared moments of hardship, of doubt, where he had felt invisible in a sea of qualified candidates. This vulnerability served as the bedrock of his vision. It reminded him, and the others, that they were all humans, struggling with their insecurities amidst a tide of expectation. However, each moment of enlightenment bore its own price. As he laid himself bare, his self-consciousness fluttered like a caged bird, thrumming against the bars of his resolve. Was he truly willing to expose his raw self in the pursuit of change? The answer emerged slowly, birthed from the depths of his silent confrontation with the persistent doubt that had plagued him for years. Yes, he would dare to stand tall in his vulnerability, recognizing it as a source of strength. "Let's embrace the uncomfortable," he challenged, as he locked eyes with the veteran. "Let's use our collective expertise to build something extraordinary. Will we fight for preservation, or will we strive for evolution?" The uncertainty of his own words was replaced by an exquisite clarity. The need to incite change resonated beyond institutional walls. It felt personal. With his heart pounding, he could feel the tide slowly shifting. The younger faculty member who had nodded earlier in support now leaned forward, visibly engaged. A murmur rippled through the room, as if they were collectively grappling with the implications of what he was proposing. Could they allow themselves to be vulnerable too?
As the meeting pressed on, it became clear that Jake's battle was not merely in the details of his proposals, but in the act of sharing who he was, honest and unguarded. And just like that, the once ominous weight of expectation had morphed into potential, a bridge that connected his past failures to his present fight for authenticity. Yet lurking beneath the surface of triumph was unease, a whisper that urged caution. What if unveiling this new side only left him exposed, vulnerable to the same doubts he'd harbored for years? Rendering himself authentically flawed was a risk, one that could either galvanize support or invite further criticism. As Jake turned to face the room again, the energy crackling in the atmosphere shifted once more, signaling an impending climax. He found himself at a crossroads, standing stronger yet uncertain about the true cost of leading change. Would he emerge from this battle resolute and embraced, or fragile and isolated? And just as the thought had taken root, Jake caught sight of the veteran administrator preparing to respond, the weight of an impending judgment looming over him like thunderclouds on the horizon. A current of anxiety surged through him. The time had come to face a reckoning, a moment that could either fortify his resolve or send him spiraling back into self-doubt. Jake's heart raced as he met the veteran administrator's gaze, a collision of experiences and ideologies brewing between them. The weight of judgment held a familiar sting, flooding him with the memories of past criticisms. He had often shied away from confrontation, hiding within the shadows of his insecurities. But not this time. This time would be different. The administrator cleared his throat, drawing the room's collective attention like a conductor leading an orchestra. "While I can appreciate your enthusiasm for innovation, Jake," he began, his voice steady yet laced with skepticism, "one must wonder if we are truly equipped to handle such drastic changes. This isn't merely about funding, it's about the stability of our system." Each word felt engineered to elicit doubt, and Jake braced himself, channeling his fear into resolve. What is stability if not a veil for stagnation? The question slipped from his lips, surprising even himself. He was stepping onto uncharted territory, pushing back against the scripts that had long since been written. We cannot allow ourselves to be prisoners of tradition if we aim to serve our students' evolving needs. For the first time, he felt unleashed. An unexpected wave of clarity surged through him as he articulated the misgivings that had clouded his thoughts for years. He aimed to expose the fragility of the beliefs held dear by those who feared the new. As objections arose, he recognized them not as threats, but as opportunities, inviting him to refine his arguments, to interrogate his values further. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Murmurs fluctuated between solidarity and uncertainty.
Peers leaned forward, some crossing their arms, others furrowing their brows as they weighed his proposal against their long-held beliefs. Jake seized the moment, not afraid to leverage their ambivalence. "Change is inherently uncomfortable," he pressed. "I stand before you not just as an advocate for a new curriculum, but as a fellow educator who has felt the weight of what we ought to abandon. We owe it to our students to dive into the unknown." With each statement, he felt empowered, his earlier anxiety morphing into a sense of purpose. Shifting his focus from the veteran administrator to the younger faculty member who had displayed interest earlier, Jake offered a glimmer of connection. "What about you, Emily? Don't you think that our students would benefit from a more contemporary approach to their education, one that caters to their future rather than to our nostalgia?" Jake met Emily's hesitating but willing gaze, and a flicker ignited within him. He wasn't just fighting against the skeptical old guard. He was advocating for the future of education, standing side by side with those who shared that vision, even if their structures of belief needed dismantling. He could sense the tides turning ever so slightly as dialogue opened up among his colleagues. Some nodded in accord, others debated amongst themselves. Yet Jake was aware that this moment held a dual edge. Each breakthrough brought with it the risk of pushing even harder against the rigid boundaries they had adhered to. Would they accept the challenge, or would they retreat into the comforts of familiarity? As the conversation grew more animated, Jake felt a familiar pang, the icy grip of self-doubt creeping back, this time entangled with the question of his own readiness for leadership. The expectations were mounting, a weight that felt almost unbearable. Was he prepared to withstand scrutiny if he led them into this new territory? And how would he gauge his worth at the end of it all? In the midst of this internal struggle, he instinctively glanced back at the veteran, whose expression was inscrutable. Would this challenge solidify his position or lead to further division? As the room continued to buzz with dialogue, Jake was starting to sense the urgency of a pendulum poised to swing either way. Just then, a critical thought struck him. What if the veteran was right in some respects? Was he truly prepared to bear the consequences of change? Jake's resolution shifted from an impulsive crusade to a more calculated approach. He needed to solidify alliances and gather support that would carry weight in his proposals. But how could he effectively navigate the minefield of strong opposition? With that question reverberating in his mind, an unsettling realization set in. The battle wasn't merely with institutional traditions. It was fundamentally about unearthing his inner strengths and confronting his shadow. The realization gripped him, but the tantalizing prospect of knowing where this journey might take him as he wrestled with this newfound battle, doubt and determination side by side, was exciting and terrifying. As he cleared his throat to formulate his next statement, the tension in the room thickened, as if the air itself awaited his next move. With his heart pounding, Jake knew he stood at another brink. Would he conquer his fears or allow them to dictate the outcome? The time had come to meet his true self, and he could almost hear the faint echo of his internal compass whispering what lay beyond the horizon.
As Jake emerged from the latest faculty meeting, he felt a palpable shift in his core. The clamor of uncertainty that had accompanied him through weeks of tension began to lift, revealing a landscape where possibilities thrived. Surrounded by colleagues who had once seemed so daunting, he now felt an unexpected kinship, recognizing shared struggles in their laughter and their debates. He had conquered a great internal battle that day. By articulating his vision for change, Jake had proved not just the validity of his ideas, but also the weight of his voice in an environment that had long fettered him. As doubts and fears receded, they left in their wake a burgeoning confidence that illuminated his professional landscape. Jake realized that he had taken up space not merely as an adjunct, but as a leader and advocate for an innovative educational paradigm. Sitting at his desk the next day, Jake sifted through the positive responses flooding his inbox. A palpable excitement coursed through him as colleagues expressed their willingness to collaborate on new projects, inspired by his recent advocacy. Conversations touched on the very funding strategies he had envisioned. Discussions of broader curriculum reforms echoed through his thoughts, each note of encouragement serving as fuel for his ambition. With meticulous attention, he drafted proposals outlining tangible action steps to expand the curriculum and advocate for a more inclusive funding model. He meticulously combined their insights with his own research, crafting a collaborative document that reflected the shared values of both innovation and responsibility. Each word typed electrified him, transforming his earlier anxiety into a tangible sense of accomplishment. Yet, with this newfound drive came the recognition of the hurdles still ahead. Jake understood that the path to lasting reform would not be a straight line. It would require deft navigation through entrenched mindsets and strategic persuasion. He knew that maintaining momentum meant rallying continuous support, engaging skeptics with empathy, and inviting dialogue rather than dismissal. In conversations with colleagues, Jake honed his skill of empathetic listening. He shared his story and encouraged others to connect their personal narratives to the broader mission.
The swirling apprehensions that loomed had given way to a steadfast commitment, reinforcing his belief that his voice, when harmonized with others, would resonate beyond the departmental walls. At the subsequent meeting, as proposals were put forth, the spirit of collaboration infused the air. He observed a transformation, not only in the reactions of his peers, but in the very culture of their academic community. Complexity gave way to clarity. Exciting, novel ideas charged the room, paving the way for a renaissance in teaching methodologies. Jake found himself unwittingly embodying the role of a facilitator, guiding discussions, encouraging diverse perspectives, while pushing for accountability. Each suggestion reinforced their collective responsibility to elevate student engagement and course relevance. As students sought to understand the world through the lens of history, they had begun to reimagine their own narratives. In one pivotal moment, as he summarized the core themes of their discussions, Jake felt an awe-inspiring clarity wash over him. He stood precisely at the intersection of aspiration and reality. He had become the change agent he always imagined. No longer confined by titles, fears, or doubts, the bond forged with his colleagues now felt like a solid foundation. The echo of his earlier insecurities receded like a distant memory. Today, he was not a mere adjunct. He was a vital part of an academic transformation, embodying the very essence of resilience and vision that defined the legacy he admired in the annals of the Roman Empire. As the meeting adjourned, Jake basked in the gratitude of exchange that radiated through the room. The ideas discussed would find their way into the curriculum and ultimately ripple out to impact students' lives. He had achieved recognition, not just among his peers, but from within himself. The performance he had danced around for so long had shifted into a genuine demonstration of leadership.
Days turned into weeks, and as the semester unfolded, Jake received invitations to collaborate on interdisciplinary initiatives, further embedding him into the fabric of academic life. The lingering fear of being undermined or unheard had transformed into a stalwart vision, one of empowerment, innovation, and clear value. He smiled as he walked through the hallways he had once feared. The palpable uncertainty had given way to unshakable confidence. Jake had not only filled his role, he had redefined it. The journey towards monumental change, both personal and professional, had triggered a profound transformation, and such growth was worth not just pursuing, but cherishing. He raised his head high, feeling the weight of possibility. The shadows of self-doubt were embarked upon a path overshadowed by accomplishment. Jake had forged himself anew through challenges. The transition from uncertainty to leadership was no small feat.
He stepped forward into the future, committed to a mission that he was now unashamedly passionate about, fostering a dynamic, inclusive educational environment. This was just the beginning of an inspiring journey of reform, one that reflected the courage he had drawn from both history and his very own metamorphosis. Now is the time for you to make your voice heard. If you've related to Jake's transformation, subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. It makes a huge difference. Comment below with your thoughts and reactions because we want to hear your theories about transformative journeys like Jake's. And hey, share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second because true fans of personal overcoming stories recognize the power of solidarity and support within these narratives.